Welcome to MacStories Unwind, a weekly review of everything MacStories and more. Today's show is brought to you by Raycast. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Vitici. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John Voorhees. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's Friday once again. I don't know how this comes around every single week, but, Friday is here again, and we're doing Unwind. So let's talk about what happened on the site this week.
All right. So on the site this week, I had a review for a really fun and exciting and expensive accessory for the iPad Pro 11-inch and 12.9-inch, as well as the 2020 iPad Air. The accessory is the new Kensington Studio Dock. So there's photos and not really a review, my first impressions. I wrote this article after only having been able to spend 24 hours with the device. So this is a combination of a stand and a hub for your iPad Pro. It looks like a mini iMac, basically. You're attaching the iPad to this stand, and the iPad becomes the display. And you have this stand made of aluminum and plastic. At the very foot of the stand is also a Qi charging pad. So you can charge your iPhone and AirPods at the bottom of the stand. And this device, the Studio Dock, comes with a bunch of expansion ports for your iPad. An SD card, there's an SD card slot, audio jack, USB-C, USB-A, Ethernet, and Kensington, what are they called? Like security locks?
Yeah, security locks, yeah.
Yeah. So it's a really interesting approach in terms of combining two things into an all-in-one device. And what I like about this is obviously the build quality is really good. It supports display rotation and customizable viewing angle. Unfortunately, it does not support height adjustability. But what I appreciate is the fact that it turns the iPad into really a desktop workstation. Provided that you have an external keyboard and a mouse or trackpad, this is really turning the iPad into a desktop setup that, unlike an iMac or any other desktop computer, at any point you can detach the iPad from it and go back to using it as a tablet, or perhaps put it inside a Magic Keyboard. So I really appreciate it, and I shared my thoughts in the story. Now, a few words of caution. One of the complaints that I had, in addition to the price, in addition to the timing of it, because there's supposedly an iPad Pro refresh coming very soon, and it may or may not be compatible with the Studio Dock. And I also noted in my list of complaints how the built-in USB ports, they do not support the latest USB 3.2 Gen 2 standards. They are limited to 5 gigabit per second transfers. And the USB-A ports in the back, they also support only 5 watts for in terms of charging rate. So USB ports could be a little better. There's also HDMI, but right now it doesn't really make sense to have the iPad placed inside this kind of device connected to an external monitor, because all you'll be doing is mirroring the iPad to a display. Right. But the iPad is already like this elevated display. So it doesn't really make sense right now. Maybe in iPad OS 15. So I like it. I love it. I'm going to try it at my desk as my main setup for a couple of weeks and see what happens. It's not an accessory for everybody. I mean, it costs $400. And when you consider also the cost of a keyboard and I guess a Magic Trackpad, or I don't know, a Logitech mouse, it becomes this $600+ purchase that, I mean, with that kind of money, you kind of can get, at the very least, you can get a refurbished iPad Pro for sure. But it's like, it's $600 to get it all together. So think about it. You got to be a specific type of iPad user, as I argue in the story, to be in the market for the Studio Dock. But personally, all things considered, I mean, I really like it. It's really well done.
Yeah, it does look great. And I suspect that Kensington is in part marketing this to businesses, to the enterprise, where maybe companies are replacing full-on PCs with iPads, where people need to be mobile too, and that this creates a nice workstation for when you're back at your desk and that kind of thing. And that that could explain part of the price too, and the fact that the ports aren't the most current, fastest ports either. Having faster ports in some circumstances makes a big difference, especially if you're like a photographer and you're trying to transfer a bunch of raw photos or something over an SD card or over, from a drive over USB-A. This week, Federico, too, Alex did a review of Panic's Nova 5, which is their code editor. And, this is a great code editor. I have been aware of Nova for a long time. I don't, work editing code these days, so I don't really have a personal use for it. But boy, it looks so good that I almost started thinking maybe I should just start doing some of my writing in this app. But that it's really meant for something far more powerful than that, and that is doing development. And one of the things I think that Alex pointed out that rang true for a lot of people is the fact that in a lot of code editors on the Mac, when you go to change the preferences, you're presented with a JSON text file where you have to kind of go in the actual code editor and edit the preferences right there as text, which is not a very Mac-like experience, whereas Nova has what you would expect in a Mac app. It has real preferences that you can change, and that's just a little thing. I mean, Nova has fantastic syntax highlighting as well as autocomplete and a whole plugin architecture that people can build plugins for to accomplish different tasks in Nova. And while the app is still relatively young compared to some code editors, so there are fewer plugins than there are for some alternatives, it's really becoming a pretty healthy marketplace for plugins as well. So that's neat. The other thing that I thought was really cool is that there's a sidebar that lists all your folders and files in your code project. And when you click on one, it opens an ephemeral tab, which is not a concept that I really was that familiar with, which is it opens a tab so you can basically see what's in that file. But if you click away to another tab or to another file in your sidebar, it disappears again. You can make it stick by double-clicking the title of it or double-clicking it in the sidebar, but otherwise it's really almost like having your own little tab preview, which I started thinking about that and thinking, boy, I kind of wish that was in text editors too. I could really see, when I'm working on a couple of different documents and trying to make sure information matches up between two different things, that kind of thing would be nice in a regular old text editor too. So great write-up by Alex. And if you're doing code editing, just definitely check out Nova if you haven't yet.
All right. So this week, the downtime organizer app Sofa added a bunch of integrations that basically led me to reconsider Sofa as a potential, I'm going to say it, John, home screen candidate for me. So in the latest version, Sofa, which we reviewed a bunch of times before on MacStories, there's plenty of links in the coverage by John that you can click and check out all of our previous reviews. In the latest version, you can now save apps from the App Store, audiobooks, and physical board games in Sofa. Board games is interesting because this is the first time Sofa is expanding into the physical market in terms of games. Now that they're doing this, there's plenty of things that they could consider, right? Like vinyl collections or CD collections, right? There's services like Discogs, for example, that allow developers to search for certain limited editions of CDs and vinyls. So really interesting that Sofa is doing this. However, in addition to the new categories, there's also a new backup functionality for backing up your library and restoring backups in Sofa, as well as deep linking for any section of the app. Now, also 11 new themes. The custom theming system, one of the most fascinating implementations of themes that I've seen on the App Store. There's a lot of themes in Sofa. Each of them is really, really well done. A lot of attention to detail for the color scheme and the associated icon. And you can purchase each one individually. So really the primary monetization system for Sofa is the theming system. Really, really fascinating. I'm considering to put Sofa on the home screen, John, for a couple of reasons. Mm-hmm. I like the idea of having a list of apps that I want to check out. I think that's a cool idea. The second one is, since I stopped using Apple Music, I no longer have a I can no longer use MusicBot, right? For saving albums that I want to listen to
Right.
and reopening them quickly. Now, I could work on a Spotify version of MusicBot, but it wouldn't be as good as the Apple Music version. Instead, what I guess I'm going to end up doing is I could save albums that I want to listen to into Sofa, and just so that I can have a visual bookmarking system for albums. However, and I've been talking to the developer, Sean Hickman, I believe it's their name, the developer of Sofa, about this. Right now, when you save an album to Sofa, when you reopen the album, on the detail page, there's only one Apple Music button.
Right.
And I asked Sean, hey, can you also consider a Spotify button? Or at the very least, like maybe integration with Audacity. So Audacity, and there's similar services like it, used to be called SongLink. It's one of those services that allow you to generate links to multiple streaming services for the same song or the same album. So doesn't matter if you're an Apple Music subscriber or use Spotify or Tidal or Deezer or Amazon Music, whatever, you can generate sort of these service agnostic links that take you to whatever app you use for your music.
Yeah, it's a great service because that's a lot more complicated than it sounds, especially because a lot of albums are released with different IDs in different regions of the world, as well as different services.
Yeah. So I believe Sean is considering this. So I think I'm going to, because of this, I think I'm going to try and put Sofa. And also, I was already using Sofa for TV shows and movies. So now I'm going to add apps and music. Could be a fun. I have a free home screen slot at the moment. I don't know why. What did I delete from my home screen?
I don't know.
I honestly don't know. So
it's probably a mistake.
No, I'll tell you what. I think I moved my calendar to the second page.
Oh, all right.
So it's either gonna be Sofa or it's gonna be Mailbrew. We'll see what happens.
Interesting. Well, are you using TV Forecast for TV shows too? Is your
at
use
the moment I am. But
would this replace that?
No, because TV Forecast I only use for my progress, right?
Got it. That's what I figured.
Checking into shows and syncing them with Tracked. Whereas in Sofa, like right now, for example, I saved months ago and I still gotta watch it. The Last Dance on Netflix, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Designated Survivor, which is this other show on Netflix, like things that I want to watch, not things that I'm currently watching.
Right. I got it. All right. Well, we also had some news items this week. One is that Apple Maps has added COVID-19 vaccination sites in the U.S. to the Maps app. So that's great. I actually went in and checked it out, and I saw a bunch of the pharmacies in my area that are doing it, which I was already kind of aware of. But, you can tap on any of these sites, and it'll give you the hours, a link to the website, a phone number, address, that sort of thing. So it makes it easier to find vaccination if you're eligible for that. And finally, Federico, we need to pour one out for the HomePod because this is
the HomePod is gone.
Yeah, this is. And I blame you. I blame you for killing my HomePods. Yes, because you abandoned it. Apple found out. They listened to Connected or App Stories, and they decided, well, if Federico's not in on this 100%, we're done. That's what I think happened.
I mean, you do have a point.
Yeah.
I think it's totally what happened.
It is.
So the original HomePod, after 4 years?
Yeah, I think 2017 is when it came out, right?
Yeah. I remember you, John, driving through a snowstorm.
For nothing.
Well, it wasn't for nothing. We really enjoyed the HomePod for 3 years.
Good.
And then we stopped enjoying it. So,
right.
But you linked, about the HomePod and the overall home strategy at Apple. You linked to a fascinating story by Zach Hall at 9to5Mac, right?
Yeah, Zach did a really good job, I think, of putting his finger on why the HomePod being discontinued late on a Friday is so concerning. And I'm kind of right there with him because it raises so many questions about where are things going in terms of HomeKit, the AirPods Max, the HomePod Mini, all those things that are living room type things. The Apple TV too, right? I mean, it raises more issues and questions than it resolves for sure. And this is probably an episode of App Stories in the making, I think. But it does make me wonder what Apple is doing. It could be that this is, we saw the iMac Pro get discontinued the week before, and maybe by the time this episode is out, since it's a Friday, maybe something else will be discontinued today. But it does feel a little bit like maybe Apple is clearing the decks, as they sometimes do in advance of things like events and WWDC, getting bad news out of the way before releasing some new products. But I don't know. I mean, it's hard to imagine getting rid of the HomePod today without something there to replace it. And right now, as we stand, that's where it is. And I know you guys talked about this on Connected,
hold on. Yeah, we did. But you just mentioned something about Fridays and very in the news. We're recording this on a Friday. So what's on the chopping block
The
today?
iPod Touch.
And I was going to say the iPod Touch.
Absolutely that.
I also think they're going to, one of these Fridays, John, they are going to discontinue the iPod Touch. I can feel it.
It was 5:00, I think, in California, because I know I was writing the story on Friday at 7:30 in the evening, which is not normally when I'm working, but that's when it happened. And they tried to bury it. But boy, Twitter blew up pretty quickly over that.
Yeah.
All right, Federico, why don't you tell us about Club Mac Stories this week?
In MacStories Weekly this week, I continued my exploration of Taio, the scriptable text editor with Markdown support. I shared my initial set of 3 actions last week, and this week I shared an additional 4 actions for the Markdown editor for image links, for finding footnotes, for counting words, and starting Google searches from Taio. And as I mentioned in the story, I will, for now, I think, finalize this mini-series with the 3rd and final installment.
All right.
Where I will be taking a look at another side of Taio, which is the clipboard manager that is built into the app. So be on the lookout for that at some point over the next few weeks. John, what did you have in the newsletter?
Well, we actually debuted kind of a new section in the newsletter called MacStories Recommends, and it's really an evolution of our MacStories favorite, which traditionally has been a favorite app, but we're expanding it to include accessories, gear, and media. Maybe some of the picks that you hear about on Unwind will eventually end up as a MacStories recommendation. So I did CleanShot X this week, and CleanShot X, I call it X, it could be 10, but I don't think there was a 9, so I'm going to call it X. It's a screenshot.
Good point, though.
Right? I mean, so that's why I call it X. So it's a screenshot and screen recording app that's really fantastic. I discovered this in the midst of doing my Big Sur review in the fall, and it does just a couple of things it actually does a lot more things, but a couple of things that are particularly important for me that go beyond what you can do with the system screenshotting and screen recording options on the Mac that came in really handy for that review and have been things that I've continued to use since, and I've discovered a bunch of other little features and things that have been helpful in the work that I do. So I talk about those. And we also had an interview with Sawyer Blatz, who's the developer of Nudget, which is a budgeting app on iOS. Fantastic app. So Sawyer joined us and answered some questions about his app and some other things. And that was a lot of fun to have. All right, Federico, we also, this Monday on App Stories, we published a new episode, and it was all about whether apps can still surprise us, which is
complicated conversation.
Very complicated conversation that we can't really encapsulate here in a minute or two, but it really comes down to, how much room is there for innovation on the App Store still? Are we just too jaded app reviewers who feel like they've seen it all? What exactly is at play here? Is it something underlying the technology in iOS and the Mac and that sort of thing? We kind of explore all of those questions this week, which was a lot of fun and I think made for a good episode. All right, Federico, I want to tell you a little bit about our sponsor, too, for this episode and MacStories, and that is Raycast. Raycast is a native Mac productivity tool that really defies definition because it's way more than just a replacement for Spotlight. When you invoke Raycast with the keyboard, you can launch an app, of course, just like you could with Spotlight. but you can do a bunch of other things. You can search for and access your files. You can use third-party apps and services like G Suite, GitHub, Jira, Asana, Linear, and a whole bunch more. You can take a look at your schedule, start schedule, or join a Zoom meeting, access the clipboard, set a reminder, take a quick note, control all sorts of different Mac system functions, and a bunch more things beyond that. Plus, Raycast not only has all these things built in, but it's extensible with scripts too. And they're working on an API, a web API that is in alpha right now, but you can check it out and get, kick the tires and start using that as well. The app respects your privacy. The data doesn't leave your Mac, and all of your credentials for those third-party services I mentioned, they're all stored in Apple's keychain too. Download Raycast today from raycast.com to level up your productivity. Again, that URL is raycast.com. Our thanks to Raycast for their support of Unwind and MacStories. Okay, Federico, we're going to start a little bit something different on Unwind today. It's the week of new things. Why don't you explain what we're doing here?
So we thought it'd be interesting to, at least for now, every once in a while, not every episode, but when something catches our eye, to have a brief recap on what's new on Apple Arcade. Because, it's a perfect fit for Unwind, right? Both Apple Arcade and Unwind, I guess, Apple Arcade releases new games on Friday, and we release Unwind on Friday as well. And Unwind is all about, recapping what happened during the week and preparing for the weekend and having recommendations for games, music, TV shows, books, all kinds of media to chill and relax and have fun over the weekend. And so we thought, why don't we take a look at, what's new on Apple Arcade? And this week we have 2 new games on Apple Arcade that at least one of them I'm going to check out. So the first one is called Cozy Grove. And it's this sort of Animal Crossing-esque title where you can build so there's this haunted island and you can build a camp, make friends with these other ghosts that live on the island. And there's quests that you need to take care of, and you can collect your, I believe they're called spirit animals. There's crafting, there's fishing involved. So I think the overall goal is to bring back the color to these islands. And it's
right.
sort of, inspired by Animal Crossing in this, with this twist of this spectral island that you got to restore to life, I guess, which is, graphically speaking, it looks very nice. The other game that I am personally intrigued by, I remember this, if I'm not mistaken, this was announced in the very first wave of Apple Arcade games.
Yeah, I think
it never
so.
came out.
I think so, yeah.
It's called Hitchhiker. And Hitchhiker is this adventure game where you as a hitchhiker have no memory of like who you are, where you're going, and you got to catch a series of rides across these beautiful landscapes. And basically you got to track all you remember is that you got to find a person close to you that disappeared. And it's like what I find fascinating is the whole premise of it, trying to piece together this puzzle of like who you are and where you're going. And also the landscape, right? This beautiful highways surrounded by, the countryside, and hitching a ride with these strangers and sort of coming up, picking up clues along the way, piecing together different bits of information. I think it's a really fascinating game. This is the kind of weird and innovative game that I love to see on Apple Arcade, that I love to see more often. It's not another puzzle game, and it's not another multiplayer game. So I think I'm going to check this out.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really neat one to check out. And we'll put some links to trailers and things in the show notes so you can check out a little bit more about each of these games, even the ones that are like Hitchhiker, which isn't out yet, but is coming soon, according to Apple Arcade. All right, Federico, let's move on to our own picks. And before you mention your pick, I would like to ask you what I should be buying on the Nintendo eShop, because there's a big sale going on right now. And I was looking at this list that Mashable had published earlier today, and there's a lot of good games on here. And I was just wondering, which of these, where would you send me if you were to send me towards one or two of these games?
All right. So Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle.
Very
really
good.
fantastic. Very good game. Immortals Phoenix Rising. It's a Breath of the Wild-like game by Ubisoft that it's set in ancient Greece.
Oh, right. I remember that. I remember you talking about that before.
It's you can tell that it's obviously was inspired by Breath of the Wild,
Sure.
but also it's really nice to look at, and it's not bad. I would also recommend. There's a bunch of old games here,
Right.
So I don't think you are the type of person that will enjoy the Final Fantasy series, really deep and long and complex games. However, if some of our listeners are Final Fantasy people, there's Final Fantasy VII, but really at this point you should just play Final Fantasy VII Remake on PS4 and PS5.
Mm-hmm.
On the Nintendo Switch, though, what I think is interesting is Final Fantasy IX, and one of the unappreciated gems in the Final Fantasy series, and Final Fantasy X and X-2 HD Remaster. So those, for Final Fantasy games, those are the ones I would get on the Switch. For you, John, in addition to Mario and Rabbids and the Immortals Phoenix Rising, I am going to say Okami HD. If you never played Okami, this came out on PS2.
No, I never did.
Was remastered on PS4. Beautiful adventure game set in ancient Japan.
Oh.
You play as this goddess Amaterasu in the form of a dog, of this holy creature,
Mm-hmm.
and you need to really amazing graphic style. You haven't seen anything like it. It's not it's sort of like a Zelda game in terms of, it's like an adventure game.
Okay.
But yeah, just to look at it, it's just so beautiful. I remember when it came out on PS2 and I was a kid, I was shocked. And then they remastered it in 2018, so 3 years ago, and it looks even better. Like, yeah, this one, and it costs what, $10?
Yeah, these are great deals. A lot of these games are 50% off right now.
So is this sale also happening in Italy?
I think so. I assume so.
All right, I'm gonna spend a bunch of money. Perfect. Thank you.
Well, so am I after talking to you. All right, Federico. Well, why don't you tell us what your pick is? Because I know you had a game that you picked.
So my pick for this week is a demo for a game that is actually coming out on console, and in this case, I'm playing on Xbox. So it's coming out on Game Pass on April 1st. It's called Outriders. So Outriders that I recently discovered, I don't know, on Twitter because someone tweeted something about it. It's this third-person shooter game with an interesting story. So, you got me with a story because I'm not usually like a shooter type person. But it's this fascinating story about the human race trying to, obviously Earth was destroyed because humans are stupid and they needed to find another planet. They find this planet. They had to travel in deep space for 83 years. And you may wonder, well, how can you travel for 83 years without, all the passengers of the starship dying? Well, they put them in cryo. So they froze them up and they traveled for 83 years. They arrived on the planet. And when they do, well, the planet doesn't like them. And there's this big sort of a geo event, this anomaly that destroys everything except you, the protagonist, who wakes up. So you basically manage to survive this electromagnetic anomaly that occurs. You are put in one of those cryo things by one of your teammates.
Okay.
The problem is you wake up something like 10 or 20 years later. The planet was colonized, but you are the only one left. And the current inhabitants of the planet don't like you.
Oh, no.
So it's this fascinating story of human and of space exploration. And the mechanics are fascinating because it's a shooter with RPG elements. And I did some research, and I guess it's not surprising because this game is published by Square Enix. A shooter with RPG elements. You can use magic, you can level up, you can try different pieces of gear and equipment. So I'm playing the demo, having a really good time. I will check out the full game on Game Pass April 1st. I also have a quick music recommendation. It's a single that contains 2 songs. The single by Against the Current.
All right.
So Against the Current, they are this rock band based in New York, I believe, that they sound like modern-day Paramore. They have a female lead. I believe her name is Chrissy Costanza. And this new single contains 2 songs, Weapon and what's it called? That Won't Save Us. Really good songs, and especially That Won't Save Us. Totally my kind of sort of alternative rock with some punk rock influences. I enjoy them. Perfect for working out. You know, you want to break a sweat, put on Weapon, put out That Won't Save Us, and yeah, really good sound.
No, that sounds great. I have not actually heard that yet, so I'll have to check it out when we're done recording. I'm going to recommend a game too this week. It's a very much a video game week this week, but I'm going to recommend Scott Pilgrim versus the World, the game. And this was it's the complete edition, which just came out on the Switch, and that's where I've been playing it. This game is fantastic. It came out originally in 2010, and it's just really faithful to the Scott Pilgrim comic series, which very few games that are based off of, you know, some sort of comic book or other property really capture what makes them popular in the first place. But I think this one is particularly well done, and it was done by Ubisoft and originally debuted on the PS3. And over time, there was various DLC that was issued, and this version, which was just brought back for the Switch, is the complete edition, which has all of the DLC baked into it. It's a side-scrolling fighting game. It's really hard, but it's a lot of fun too. And I've just loved this. It's got a really cool chiptune soundtrack too by Anna Managuchi, which, you know, it's that alone is fantastic. There was at one point, Limited Run Games did a special physical edition of this game because it's just, you know, downloadable on the eShop, and they had all kinds of extras, and I was very tempted to get it, but I didn't. I just went with the downloaded version, and I've been playing it off and on for the last couple of weeks, and it's a ton of fun. If you ever played it, it's nice. Even if you've already played it, maybe, you know, several years ago, it's just really nice to kind of have all the DLC in one place. And I really like playing this handheld. It just feels right on the Switch, in particular. You know, playing it in your lap as you use it in handheld mode. So great game. I highly recommend it. All right, Federico, that's it for this episode of Unwind. You can find us both over at MacStories.net, where we're writing and doing all the other things we do. Federico's over on Twitter and Instagram too, as at Vitici, that's VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees, JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next Friday, Federico.
Ciao, John.